Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of RE373, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Duel, written by ThreeDucksInAManSuit.
Preposterous!
A chitin-clad appendage was brought down upon the ambassador's desk with a thundering crash.
These trade concessions are simple. There is no reason the delegation cannot accept them.
With all the careful diplomacy of a practiced politician, Anna choked a sigh that demanded to be set free before it could offend half the chamber. But she still had to glance down at her notes to avoid giving the Lucandite the withering glare her 3 adult children still feared to this day. The proposal suggests by the honorable delegate, she began with care, would negate any possible advantages for humanity and result in an entirely one-sided situation in favor of the Empire.
This is not acceptable.
The Lucandite raised its horns, a sign Anna recognized as a challenge. Here it came, the moment she knew was always going to happen since the beginning of this farcical negotiation.
If the delegation from Earth is unable to access the concessions as laid out by the great Lucandite Empire, then this delegate sees only one possible outcome.
It extended a massive foreclaw towards Anna from across the table, its fellows filling the room with chattering excitement.
Under Article 3 of the Great Treaty, this delegate challenges the human ambassador to a duel of supremacy.
Anna would have acted a great deal more shocked if she hadn't been expecting this from the beginning. Every other ambassador had warned her to just let the Lucandite have his way, whatever he wanted, because as long as she did, the Empire would take only in moderation. But as the delegate had demanded more and more trade concessions from humanity, resulting in a one-sided deal barely a step above turning Earth into a slave colony, Anna had put her foot down. And so the Empire had played their most powerful card. Humanity accepts. Eye stalks and sensory organs from the zoo of alien ambassadors turned towards Anna with various expressions of shock. The Lucandite's challenge was expected. This was not. Humanity was new to the galactic stage. It made some sense that they would be ignorant of how powerful Lucandites were. But surely, the other ambassadors had warned her about what would happen. Surely she could see the specimen before her. The contrast was insane. The Lucandite was almost double the human's height and covered in black carapace armor, capable of halting most kinetic weaponry with ease. His biggest limbs were the width of the human's entire torso, and all that was just his appearance. Lucandites have multiple redundancies for every vital system. They can survive being impaled through almost any single part of their body. Combine that with the shock-absorbent gel artificially introduced to the underside of their carapace that renders most impacts trivial, and they become virtually unkillable, walking tanks. Compare that to the human. She was of average height for a human female, not particularly strong or physically excellent for her kind. Soft flesh presenting only a thin layer of protection for several vulnerable areas. She couldn't possibly win. At the acceptance of the challenge, the hall filled with the clacking of the Lucandites in the audience making their excitement known. No less a race had accepted a challenge from the Empire in decades. This was a rare opportunity for the Empire to again display its power. The speaker, presiding over the gathering, formally declared the duel and asked Anna to pick her location. With an air of calm she did not truly feel, she input a set of memorized coordinates onto the datapad offered to her. Then she and the Lucandite were ushered to a pair of teleporters that would bring them to the location. Before the Empire had come along, the archaic throwback of a law that was Article 3 hadn't been invoked in almost 50 years. The challenged party had the right to decide the location of the duel. Inevitably, they would pick their homeworld and have an instant advantage: breathable atmosphere, terrain, gravity, temperature. Because of this, on top of being a practice now largely regarded as barbaric, challenging anyone to a duel was more or less an act of suicide. Then the Empire had come along. Genetically modified soldiers with implanted rebreathers who were designed to dominate any ground they walked. Suddenly, the duel of supremacy was their tool to exploit, and the other races could do nothing about it. The fighters were both scanned to ensure neither was carrying weapons. The duel was between two individuals, and such things were not allowed. A huge part of the Empire's dominance in this regard was because their medley of genetic and cybernetic enhancements were considered a part of their bodies.
I look forward greatly to adding your skull to my collection, human.
The Lucadite didn't have a mouth, but if it did, it would undoubtedly be grinning in savage anticipation. After the hazy confusion that always followed teleportation cleared from her mind, Anna immediately became aware of three things. The first was that she was experiencing her home gravity again, and living on other planets might have made her legs a little lazy. The second was that the sun was murderously bright, and she would kill for a pair of sunglasses. The third was the wave of heat that struck her entire body at once, making her start sweating immediately. She raised a hand to her forehead to peek around the landscape, and finally spotted what she was looking for. About 20 feet from where she had landed, an unmoving black mass stood amongst the brown rock that covered the landscape as far as the eye could see. Without hurrying, she sauntered over to it, already feeling her skin sizzle in the blazing sun. She pointedly ignored the white camera hovering above her head, transmitting the visuals of the event back to the delegates in the various races. Crouching down next to the collapsed Lucadite, the soft groaning and labored breaths filtered to a wheeze through the internal rebreather of the immobilized war machine finally entered her hearing range.
What is this? Where did you send us, human?
The question came out as a whimper. This, Anna placed a hand on the Lucadite's shell. They had been here for less than a minute, and it was already heating up like a saucepan. There's a place my kind called Death Valley, Mojave Desert, California, United States of America, Earth. Experimentally, she pulled at one of the Lucadite's twitching limbs. It was like lifting a big shipping chain. She brought it only a few inches off the ground before letting it crash back down.
Can't move.
Yes, your armor could only evolve on a planet with much lower gravity than my homeworld. We have creatures similar to you in appearance here, but they're all tiny. Anna's mind immediately went to the stag beetles Lucadite reminded her of. Now, I know this sounds quite obvious, but it's rather hot out here, and I am a 50-year-old woman, so I really would appreciate it if you would surrender sooner rather than later, Ambassador. Better for both of us, you see.
Surrender? Never.
The Lucadite's barely audible declaration was stammered out between grunts of exertion as it attempted to pull itself off the ground. The attempt was futile. The exoskeleton alone held over a ton of mass, and in Earth's gravity it was a coffin. Anna stood back up to speak, ignoring her creaking legs and fanning herself with a hand. It's a good thing it's summer in the northern hemisphere right now. The backup location is in Australia's outback, and I wouldn't care to encounter any of your flying tigers they have there.
Fly?
Oh yes, quite lethal. Half of the universe away, one of the diplomats from Australia, watching the event live, had a sudden coughing fit. Ambassador, the gravity alone here is enough to immobilize you. But you might have noticed that that's not what will kill you. At this point, there were literal waves of heat rising up from the carapace that clothed the behemoth. It was an August midday. The temperature was likely well over 100 Fahrenheit range. I don't care how excellent your internal mechanisms are. If you don't say the word soon, you're going to be cooked alive in that shell, and I'm going to get a nasty sunburn. Surrender now. When her children watched the recording of the event a few hours later, they would shudder at that familiar glare Anna calmly delivered to the suffering creature. But for the Lucadite himself, backed by the beginnings of delirium brought on by his brain boiling in his skull, she seemed like nothing less than a furious angel descended to bring suffering onto this pathetic mortal. 5 minutes later, the Lucadite finally admitted his loss, mere seconds before finally passing out. Anna waved impatiently at the camera drone for pickup, already missing the air-conditioned negotiation chamber. The Lucadite duelist was carried by his comrades to the medical wing for treatment. Anna was handed a glass of ice-cold water and a towel by a colleague. She returned the stares of 100 alien delegates looking at her with naked amazement, while calmly wiping the sweat from her brow and rehydrating. It was good to be back in a climate-controlled building with gravity that made you feel like you could float down the corridors.
The victory goes to humanity. The deadlock is broken.
The speaker, normally an ice-cold professional, declared for the congregation.
We will now break for recess and reconvene in 1 hour. The delegates are dismissed.
The almost 60-year-old mother of 3, Diplomat, walked side by side with her assistant from the room to the human chambers, chatting about the favorable trade deal they now had. One of the nearby delegates with particularly good hearing picked up a simple question the assistant asked her as they walked. Flying tigers, really, Anna? End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.